The coffee cup had been moved, not by much, maybe 2 inches to the left of the coaster I always used, the one my late wife had bought at a roadside shop in Vermont the summer before her diagnosis. I'd set that cup in the same spot every morning for 11 years. Muscle memory. The kind of habit that doesn't break without reason. I stood in the kitchen doorway and didn't touch anything. 32 years as a forensic accountant will rewire how you see the world. Other people look at a room and see furniture. I look at a room and see data, displacement, pattern disruption, the small arithmetic of someone else's presence. The cup was 2 inches off. The window latch above the sink was angled differently than I'd left it, and the stack of mail I'd sorted the previous evening bills on the left, personal on the right, had been reversed. Someone had been in this house, and they'd tried very hard to make sure I wouldn't notice. I'm 64 years old. I live alone in the same house in Asheville, North Carolina, that my wife and I bought the year our daughter was born. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a detached garage where I still keep her garden tools because I haven't been able to move them. My name is Daniel Carr. I spent the better part of 3 decades untangling financial fraud for corporate litigation firms, and for the last 6 years, I've been retired, mostly quiet, occasionally consulted by former colleagues who know what my eyes can catch that other people's can't. My daughter's name is Renee. Her husband's name is Marcus. They had moved into the house 8 months ago. Temporary, Renee had said. Marcus's company restructured. They just needed a few months to stabilize while they figured out their next steps. I had said yes immediately, because she was my daughter, and because her mother wasn't here anymore, and because the house felt enormous in the wrong ways. I had said yes, without thinking like a forensic accountant. That was my first mistake. Standing in the kitchen that Tuesday morning, I did the thing I had trained myself to do in 32 years of professional work. I did not react. I made no sound. I set my coffee cup down very carefully in the right position this time, and I began to make a mental inventory of everything I was seeing without touching a single item. I moved through the house the way I used to move through client offices during surprise audits. Slow, systematic, looking for the gap between what should be there and what was. My home office was at the end of the hallway, behind a door I always kept closed. The door was closed now, but the gap at the bottom I'd noticed years ago that the carpet compressed slightly when the door had been opened and closed, left a faint crease pattern. The crease was fresh. Inside, my filing cabinet sat against the wall. The lock I'd had installed 3 years ago after a particularly ugly dispute with a former client who'd threatened legal action, the lock bore fresh marks near the keyhole. Thin ones. The kind left by an improvised tool, not a key. The drawer hadn't been forced open. Whoever had tried had either given up or found another way. I crouched beside the cabinet. My knees made their usual complaint. I ignored them. The drawer was still locked, which meant whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it here. Not yet. I stood up and looked at the room from the doorway. 3 weeks earlier, Renee had sat across from me at the dinner table and asked, very casually, whether I'd ever thought about consolidating my accounts. Simplifying things. She'd used that word twice. Simplifying. Marcus had nodded along without looking up from his phone, which told me the conversation had been rehearsed, and he already knew his part was to provide background agreement. I had said I was happy with my current arrangements. She had smiled and changed the subject to whether I wanted more pasta. I hadn't thought much of it then. I was thinking about it now. I went back to the kitchen, poured my coffee, and sat down at the table. Outside the window, the Blue Ridge Mountains sat gray and steady in the morning light, the same as they always had. I drank my coffee slowly and began to think through what I knew and what I needed to know and what I was going to do about the distance between the two. By the time I'd finished the cup, I had the outline of a plan. That evening at dinner, I watched them the way I used to watch opponents. Not with suspicion visible on my face, that's amateur work, but with the kind of peripheral attention that catches what people do when they think you're focused on your food. Marcus cut his chicken with quick, efficient strokes. He was nervous, not the ordinary nervousness of someone who'd had a hard day at work. This was the specific restlessness of someone managing a secret. His fork tapped the plate rim twice while Renee was talking, stopped when he noticed it, started again. Renee, by contrast, was very still. controlled. She'd always been the more composed of the two, even as a child. She got that from her mother, or perhaps from watching me work. "Dad," she said, setting down her fork with a gentle precision that I recognized as deliberate. "I've been doing some reading about estate planning. I know it's not the most fun dinner topic." I looked at her. What kind of reading? Just general information about how families handle things. She paused. "Marcus and I were talking, and with everything being so uncertain right now, we just want to make sure you're protected, that things are organized. In case anything happened. In case anything happened." I took a sip of water. I gave her time to keep talking, because people who are managing a script will fill silence with elaboration, and elaboration creates inconsistency. "Like a medical directive," she said, "or updated beneficiary designations. That sort of thing." Marcus looked at his plate. "I appreciate the thought," I said. I put my own fork down and met her eyes directly. "I'll give it some thought." The relief that crossed Marcus's face lasted less than a second before he smoothed it away. But it was there. That fraction of a second of relief. When someone expects resistance and doesn't get it, that's a tell I'd seen across conference tables for 3 decades. It meant the answer I'd given was the one he'd been hoping for, which meant there was a specific reason they wanted me cooperative. I helped clear the table and went to bed at my usual hour. I lay in the dark and made lists in my head. Account numbers, property values. The life insurance policy my wife and I had taken out together, which paid out to me when she died and which I'd updated the beneficiary on the following year, naming Renee. The equity in this house, which I owned outright. The retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, the small parcel of mountain land I'd inherited from my own father and never sold because I couldn't bring myself to. Enough. There was enough here that someone patient and calculating would find it worth planning for. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought a small motion-activated camera. The kind people use for wildlife, watching in the backyard, inconspicuous, weatherproof. I mounted it inside my office in the corner where it would look like part of the electronics clutter. I have a lot of electronics clutter, which I'd never bothered to clear because it stopped seeming important after Ellen died. The camera faced the filing cabinet and the desk. Then I called my neighbor. Howard Beale had lived next door for 27 years. He was 71, a retired high school history teacher, a widower like me, and the kind of man who paid close attention to everything happening on the street because he walked his dog every morning and every evening at precisely the same times and had done so for 2 decades. He knew the patterns of this neighborhood the way I knew financial spreadsheets. He knew what belonged and what didn't. "Howard," I said when he answered, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us for now." A pause. Then, "This sounds serious." "It might be. I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual around my house in the past few weeks. Visitors I might not know about. A car you don't recognize parked out front." Another pause. The longer kind, which told me he had something to tell me. "There was a man," he said finally, "about 10 days ago. Tuesday, I think, because I'd just come back from getting my hair cut. A car I didn't recognize parked in front of your place for maybe 40 minutes. Your truck wasn't in the driveway. Gray sedan, newer model. A man went to the front door. Renee let him in. I kept my voice even. What did he look like? Business type. 40s. Briefcase." Howard paused. "Not someone paying a social visit, if you know what I mean." I did know what he meant. "Thank you, Howard. I need one more favor. If you see that car again, or any car you don't recognize stopping at my house, will you write down the plate number?" He said he would. He said it without asking why, which was one of the reasons I'd called him. I spent that evening with my laptop, pulling up the records I needed. I had access to the county property database, a holdover from my professional days that I'd never canceled. I ran a check on my own deed. Clean as it should be. I ran it again and flagged the account for any new filings. Then I opened the online portal for my life insurance policy and found something that made me set my coffee down very carefully. The beneficiary had been changed, not to a stranger's name, to a trust account number I didn't recognize. I sat with that for a long time. The change was dated 6 weeks ago. I had not made that change. I had not authorized that change. I had not spoken to anyone at the insurance company in over 2 years. I checked my email for any confirmation of the update. There was none, which meant either the request had been made with a different email address, or someone had intercepted and deleted the confirmation before I saw it. I was a forensic accountant for 32 years. Someone had just made a very serious mistake. I went to my bedroom closet and took down the old briefcase from the top shelf, the one I'd carried to every major deposition of my career. I opened it and checked the combination lock unchanged from the day I retired and sat down on the edge of the bed with it on my lap, thinking, they thought I was a tired old man in a big house who'd simplified his life down to dinner parties and mountain views and occasional gardening. They'd moved into this house and spent 8 months watching me, learning my habits, mapping my patterns, and then they had started making moves. Very well. I knew how to make moves too. I kept everything exactly the same on the surface for 10 days. Dinners at 6:30, coffee on the porch on weekend mornings. The occasional comment about my knees bothering me, about how the years catch up with you. I asked Renee twice to help me remember where I'd put things I hadn't actually lost, and watched her face carefully each time. The second time, she exchanged a glance with Marcus that she thought I didn't see. It lasted less than 2 seconds, and contained enough information to fill a legal brief. They were building something, a narrative about my reliability, my mental sharpness. On the 11th day, I drove to Charlotte. I have a former colleague there, Patricia Holloway, who spent 20 years as a financial crimes investigator before opening her own firm. We'd worked together on a corporate embezzlement case in 2009 that had taken 18 months to build and had resulted in 11 convictions. She is meticulous, she is relentless, and she owes me a professional debt that she has mentioned on more than one occasion with the specific tone of someone who means it. I sat across from her desk and laid out what I had. The insurance beneficiary change, the marks on the filing cabinet lock, the motion camera footage from the past week, which I'd already reviewed, and which showed Marcus in my office twice during the day while I'd been running errands, working systematically through my desk drawers. The man who'd come to the house when I wasn't home. Patricia listened without interrupting, which is why she was good at her job. When I finished, she said, "Do you know who changed the beneficiary? I have a strong suspicion. I need it confirmed." She pulled up a legal pad and began writing. "Give me 48 hours. I'll pull the request record from the insurance company. They're required to maintain it. If someone forged your signature on the change form, we'll see it. What if they had power of attorney? Do you have a power of attorney in place? No. Then they didn't have one legally." She met my eyes, which means whatever they submitted was fraudulent from the start. On the drive back to Asheville, I stopped at the office of a trust and estate attorney I'd researched the previous week. Her name was Carol Nguyen. She was 43, highly rated, with a particular specialty in asset protection. I'd read 3 years of her published articles on elder financial abuse the night before, and found her thinking precise, and her recommendations aggressive in exactly the way I needed. "I want to establish an irrevocable trust," I told her, immediately, "with myself as trustee, and a specific successor trustee of my choosing who is not a family member." She looked at me over her glasses. "Can I ask what's prompting this?" Let's say I've recently learned that retirement doesn't mean I can stop watching the books. She understood. I could see it in the way she didn't ask me to elaborate. She had probably heard some version of this story before. She drafted the documents over the course of the afternoon while I sat in her conference room reviewing them section by section. By 4 o'clock, the trust was filed with Mecklenburg County, and my house, my investment accounts, and the mountain property were legally sheltered inside it. The life insurance beneficiary change I flagged directly with the insurance company, submitting a notarized statement that I had not authorized any modification to the policy, and requesting that the account be locked pending investigation. The woman I spoke to was professionally careful in how she responded, but I could hear the specific weight in her voice of someone who had handled this kind of call before. That evening I drove back to Asheville, arrived home just before 6, walked into the kitchen, and said that I'd been up to Boone for the day, just to get out of the house for a while. Renee said that sounded nice. Marcus said the mountain air was good for you. I said I thought so too. I set the table for dinner. Patricia called me 2 mornings later while I was on the porch with my coffee. "I have the beneficiary change request," she said. Submitted online 6 weeks ago using your name, your date of birth, your policy number, and your social security number. The email address on file for the confirmation was changed the same day to a Gmail account that doesn't match any of your existing accounts. The signature on the original form? She paused. There's a digital acknowledgement checkbox. No handwritten signature required for online submissions. They did their homework, Daniel. They knew which method to use to avoid a signature comparison. My jaw tightened. Where does the trust account trace to? That's where it gets interesting. The trust account number they listed as beneficiary. She typed something. It's registered in Nevada. Shell structure. 2 weeks old when they filed the change. Someone helped them with this, I said. This isn't Marcus and Renee working from a laptop. They had professional help. Agreed. She paused again. Do you want me to trace the Nevada entity? Yes. And I need you to document everything in a format that will hold up in federal court. I'll have a full report to you within the week. I sat on the porch after we hung up and looked at the mountains. Ellen had loved this view. She'd said once that it was the kind of scenery that made you understand why people stayed in a place for generations. I had stayed because she had loved it, and because leaving felt like a second loss I wasn't ready for. I thought about the first time I'd held Renee at the hospital. The specific weight of her. How certain I'd been in that moment that the rest of my life had found its shape. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes with those thoughts. Then I went inside and opened my laptop. The man who'd visited the house, Howard, had gotten a plate number the second time he appeared, 4 days ago. I'd run it through a contact at a vehicle records service and gotten a name, Stuart Falk, licensed in North Carolina as a financial planner. I found his firm's website. Boutique operation, very polished, specializing in wealth transfer and estate structuring. The kind of language that meant he helped wealthy families move money in ways that sometimes tested the boundary between aggressive planning and outright fraud. I'd seen his type 100 times in my working life, smart enough to know the law precisely well enough to operate just beside it, until they crossed the line. And then suddenly everything they'd built became evidence. I called Patricia back and gave her his name. 2 days before everything came to a point, Renee found me at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on, staring at a blank legal pad. Dad, are you all right? I looked up slowly, let a bead of confusion cross my face before I cleared it. Oh, yes, sorry. I was trying to remember something and it went away. She sat down across from me. Her eyes moved over the blank pad. The expression on her face in that moment, brief, involuntary, almost clinical, told me she was not concerned. She was assessing. You know, she said quietly, there's no shame in getting some help. With organization, with managing things. I appreciate that. Marcus and I have been talking. She folded her hands on the table. There are professionals who specialize in helping people your age stay on top of their finances. Someone who could take some of the burden off. Someone like your Mr. Falk, I thought. I looked at my blank legal pad. Nodded slowly. The way people nod when they're processing something that's slightly beyond them. Maybe you're right, I said. The relief in her eyes was real. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. And it took everything I had in 32 years of professional training to keep my face soft and uncertain and old. You don't have to figure everything out alone, she said. I know, I said. I'm your daughter. I know that too. The closing was scheduled for a Friday at 2 in the afternoon. Not a real estate closing, this time the trust structure had already made my property untouchable, but a beneficiary designation transfer, the kind that happens at an insurance firm's office rather than an escrow office, the kind that requires what they believed they had, a financial power of attorney signed by me, authorizing Marcus to act on my behalf. A document I had never signed. A document Patricia's report had now traced, with specificity, to Stuart Falk's office, where it had been notarized by a notary whose license I had already reported to the state licensing board. I dressed that Friday the way I'd dressed for every major deposition of my career. Dark suit, conservative tie. The briefcase I hadn't carried in 6 years, loaded now with organized folders. Each one labeled, each one cross-referenced. The kind of case file that doesn't leave room for interpretation. Howard drove me. He didn't ask questions. He parked in the lot and said he'd wait as long as I needed. The insurance firm's regional office was on the 14th floor of a downtown building. I took the elevator up and found the conference room where the meeting was already underway. Through the glass wall, I could see them. Renee and Marcus on one side of the table, Stuart Falk beside them, the insurance firm's representative, a man named Gerald Oates, at the head with a folder of documents open in front of him. I opened the conference room door. The conversation stopped. Renee's face changed in stages. First recognition, then confusion about why I was there. Then, in the space of about 2 seconds, something colder and more careful. "Dad." Her voice was steady. "What are you doing here?" I set my briefcase on the table. I walked to the empty chair across from her and sat down without being invited. Gerald Oates looked between us. "I'm Daniel Carr," I said, "and I own the insurance policy you're currently arranging to transfer the beneficiary on. I'm also here to tell you that this meeting cannot proceed, and to explain in some detail why." Falk leaned back in his chair. His face went through a calculation I'd seen before. The specific arithmetic of someone deciding whether to bluff or deflect. "Mr. Carr," he said, "perhaps your family can explain." I opened the first folder, slid it across to Oates. "This is a notarized statement, filed 12 days ago, that I never authorized any changes to this policy's beneficiary. You'll see the county filing stamp on the second page." Oates opened it. "Read it." His expression became very still. I opened the second folder. "This is a forensic analysis of the power of attorney document submitted to this firm on my behalf, conducted by a licensed financial crimes investigator. It identifies the document as fraudulent. You'll note the notary stamp in the lower right corner. That notary's license was suspended 4 days ago, pending investigation of fraudulent notarizations." I looked at Falk when I said it. He did not look at me. I opened the third folder. "This is a record of the beneficiary change request submitted 6 weeks ago. The Nevada trust account listed as the new beneficiary is a shell entity incorporated 2 weeks before the request was filed. Here is the registration record, and here is the financial crimes investigator's trace of its ownership structure." I laid it on the table in front of Oates. The room was very quiet. Marcus had not spoken. He sat completely still, both hands flat on the table, looking at the documents, the way you look at something you thought was far away and has just arrived very close. Renee's jaw tightened. Her hands were in her lap. I could see her thinking. "Dad," her voice was careful, "this is a misunderstanding. You were confused about what you signed. You told us yourself, your memory." I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the table. I pressed play. My own voice. "Maybe you're right." Renee's voice. "Marcus and I have been talking. There are professionals who specialize in helping people your age stay on top of their finances." Then her voice again, from the kitchen table 3 days ago, the day she'd found me with the blank legal pad. "There's no shame in getting some help. With organization. With managing things." Then Marcus, from the hallway 2 nights before that, talking to someone on the phone while he thought I was already asleep. "He's buying it. He thinks it's just about the accounts. By the time he figures it out, everything will be finalized." I stopped the recording. Oates had closed the folder in front of him. "I want to state clearly," he said, "that this firm will not be proceeding with any transaction related to this account today or at any future date until this matter is reviewed by our legal and compliance department." Falk stood up. "I need to speak with my attorney." "You should," I said. "I've already filed a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar and the Department of Insurance. I'd suggest you do it quickly." He walked to the door. He didn't look at Renee or Marcus when he left. Marcus finally spoke. He didn't say much, just, "Daniel, we can explain." I looked at him across the table. I gave him the same look I'd given witnesses in depositions when they said something that the evidence had already made impossible. Renee said nothing. She was looking at the folders on the table with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt, not quite. Something more like the specific stillness of someone whose plan has just become wreckage and hasn't yet decided what to say about it. I stood. I collected my folders and replaced them in my briefcase in the order I'd packed them. I shook Gerald Oates' hand, thanked him for his time, and told him my attorney, Carol Nguyen, would be in contact. I did not say goodbye to Renee. I walked out of the conference room, through the glass lobby, into the elevator. The doors closed. I watched the floor numbers descend and felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction and not relief. Just a steady, quiet clarity. The same thing I used to feel at the end of a long case when the evidence had finally done what evidence is supposed to do. Howard was in the parking lot where I'd left him, reading a paperback he'd brought for exactly this eventuality. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. He started the car. The weeks that followed had a procedural quality to them that I found, strangely, easier to manage than the weeks before. Procedure gives you steps. Steps give you forward motion. Forward motion keeps you out of the part of your own mind where the grief lives, and I needed to stay out of that part for a while longer. Patricia's full report went to the Asheville Police Department and to the North Carolina Department of Insurance. Stuart Falk surrendered his license pending investigation of 7 counts of fraud, of which mine was the most recent and most thoroughly documented. The notary who'd certified the forged power of attorney faced criminal charges that I was told would likely result in a plea agreement. The district attorney's office contacted me 3 weeks after the conference room meeting. They were pursuing charges against Marcus and Renee: fraud, identity theft, attempted financial exploitation of an older adult. The prosecutor was a careful woman named Elaine Rourke, and she called me twice a week with updates, which I appreciated. Carol Nowen filed the civil suit. Marcus retained an attorney immediately, which was the intelligent thing to do. Renee retained a separate one, which told me they had already begun the process of separating their legal exposure, which told me, in turn, that whatever had held their partnership together had not survived the conference room. I had the locks changed the day after that meeting. Not because I was afraid I wasn't, but because a house is a kind of argument you make with the world about who you are and what you value, and I needed the argument to be mine again. I had dinner with Howard twice a week during that period. He brought food from a place downtown he liked. We talked about things that had nothing to do with what was happening, mostly, and then sometimes about what was happening in the careful way that old friends do, where you don't have to explain everything because the person across the table has been paying attention for 27 years. He said once, over his second glass of wine, that he was sorry it had been his own daughter. I told him that was the part I still hadn't fully decided how to feel about. He said that seemed right, that there wasn't any correct way to feel about something like that, and anyone who told you there was probably hadn't been through it. I thought about Renee for a long time. Not who she'd become in the last year, but who she'd been. The child who'd sat on the porch steps and watched thunderstorms roll in over the mountains and said, when she was about 8 years old, that she thought the clouds looked like something getting decided. I had thought that was a remarkable thing for a child to say. I had told Ellen about it that night, and Ellen had laughed and said, "Renee got that from me." I thought about that for a while, in the quiet of the house, in the evenings. I didn't try to resolve it. Some things don't resolve. They just become part of the architecture of who you are. One more room in a house you've been living in for a long time. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in November, cool and clear. The mountains sharp-edged the way they get when the air goes dry. I sat in the courtroom gallery and watched Marcus and Renee receive their judgments. Renee, 18 months probation, a substantial fine, mandatory restitution. Marcus, 2 years probation, a larger fine, and a 5-year bar from any fiduciary or financial role. Falk's case was still proceeding separately, but the prosecutor had indicated the outcome would be more serious. Judge Patricia Ashworth, who had been on the criminal bench for 14 years, read a portion of my victim impact statement into the record. The person who did this was not a stranger, she read. That fact does not make prosecution less appropriate. It makes it more. Financial exploitation within a family is not a misunderstanding. It is a choice, made deliberately, over time, against someone who opened their home. When it was over, I walked out into the November air and stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, not looking at anything particular, just standing. My phone rang. It was Patricia. "I heard it went well," she said. "It went correctly," I said. "Same thing, sometimes." I drove home through the streets of Asheville, past the hardware store where I'd bought the wildlife camera, past the building where Carol Nowen had helped me build a legal structure that had made the rest of this possible, past the coffee shop where I sometimes sat on Saturday mornings with a newspaper and no particular agenda. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment before going in. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The garden that needed winterizing, which I'd get to this weekend. The wraparound porch where Ellen's rocking chair still sat, because I'd stopped being unable to look at it sometime in the past year and started simply finding it a good place to drink coffee in the morning. There was a note in my mailbox from Howard. Chicken and rice if you want company tonight. No obligation. I took the note inside and put it on the kitchen table and stood there in the quiet house that was mine, documented, protected, legally inviolable, mine, and thought about calling him back. I did. I said yes. I said 7 o'clock if that worked. He said 7 o'clock was perfect. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the mountains in the late afternoon light, the way I'd done most days for 11 years, and thought about Ellen saying the view made you understand why people stayed. I understood it. I had always understood it. I stayed. Before we end today, if this story stayed with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Stormborn Vengeance. Leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this one, share it with them. The next story is ready when you are just click the box to your left.